Yeah.
Welcome back. Today we have a brief primer on removable climbing protection, commonly called traditional protection or Trad Pro. Lead climbers place removable protection in cracks and gaps in the rock and clip the rope to it on the way up a climb. Nowadays, most climbers begin leading on sport climbs, clipping pre-placed bolts, and then transition to trad climbing on gear. It belies my age to tell you that when I started, lead climbing was all about learning chalkcraft, gear placements, because sport climbing hadn't really been firmly established in the United States. Alan Watts and his crew were just beginning to institute sport climbing at Smith Rock, Oregon in those days, though there were a few areas that boasted climbs with fixed pitons and bolts put up on lead using hand drills, but the concept of sport climbing was still pretty nascent. Removable gear placed in cracks functions much like bolts on a lead climb, except the leader must be competent at finding and exploiting the gaps in the rock and putting in the right piece with the right fit. Here, Wes is putting up a climb by placing removable pro in a crack system, and as long as those pieces are properly placed, they will take a fall. There is a huge variety of Trad Pro. This episode will address the two most common types. The first kind of Pro is considered passive protection because it has no moving parts. These are called chocks or nuts. The word chock simply refers to something that has been wedged into place. Take a wheel chock, for example. You may be familiar with the term chockstone, which is the name for a stone that is wedged in a crack. Old school climbers will sometimes sling chalk stones to use as protection. The term nut derives from the early days when climbers slung machine nuts to use as chocks. The term now applies universally to all passive pieces, whether or not they look like six-sided machine nuts. The quintessential passive nut is the basic wedge. Tom Frost invented the first such nut, called the stopper, for Chouinard equipment, which later became Black Diamond equipment. Though it is a trademarked name, climbers generally use the word stopper to refer to any wedge-type nut, much as folks use the trademark name Kleenex to refer to tissue. Nuts have a broad dimension and a narrow dimension, and they have tapers on both. They are placed in a narrowing cracks. Some varieties have curved sides. Chouinard first introduced curves on both dimensions of their stoppers to address some fit issues they had with their original straight-sided nuts. The curved sides allow the pieces to fit in a greater range of crack taper angles than straight-sided chocks. The concavity also allows the nut to work securely around bumps in the crack wall that would otherwise leave a straight-sided nut rattling around with minimal surface area contact. Since the inside walls of a crack aren't necessarily parallel, offset nuts fill the gap. Literally. Seen from above, an offset nut doesn't have a rectangular shape like a regular nut. Looking at the broad dimension, we see one face is wider than the opposite face. Similarly, looking at the narrow dimension, we see the opposite faces are sized differently. This asymmetric shape allows the offset nut to fit more securely in a flared crack where a standard nut would not. Modern Black Diamond stoppers are a hybrid. In one profile, the nut has straight, tapered sides. In the other dimension, the sides are curved, and the top-down profile reveals a slight offset in one dimension for flared cracks. The other major player in passive gear is the hex nut. Tom Frost also invented the first hex nut when he designed for Chouinard. Unlike the original repurposed machine nuts with 6 symmetrical sides and angles, the new hex-centric nut had an asymmetric profile and tapers along the broad dimension. The hex could be placed several different ways, accommodating cracks of varying taper. It can even be placed in a somewhat passive camming configuration, where the pull of a fall tries to cam the nut against the crack wall. Today, a few companies produce variations of the original Hexcentric under different hex-themed names. Most climbers lean towards Active Pro, or cams with moving parts. These devices have 3 or 4 cam wheels, or lobes, actuated by springs that push the lobes outward into an open position, hence the technical name Spring-Loaded Camming Device, or SLCD. The climber pulls a lever to adjust expansion of the lobes, customizing the unit's size to fit inside a crack. The rotating cams enable the unit to fit a range of different crack sizes, which makes them ostensibly easier and quicker to place than passive gear. They are also an ideal choice for parallel-sided cracks, which offer no taper to accommodate passive pieces. Ray Jardine invented the original SLCD, the Friend, in the mid-70s. He befriended, so to speak, Mark Vallance of the UK, who eventually founded the company Wild Country specifically to produce Ray's invention commercially. Since that time, numerous companies have designed and produced SLCDs. Some, like the original Friend, mount the cams on a single axle, while others, like the Chouinard Black Diamond Camelot, mount them on 2 axles. The fall-holding mechanics and proper placement of cams are reserved for their own episode. That's our quick primer on trad gear. Tune into future episodes when we dig into the mechanics of cams.